Welcome back all, and we will reconvene the Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting of the 18th of March and move now to item 7, which is a presentation from Environment Network Manawatu around some CAI and food security matters. And welcome Mr. Dave Mollard and Ms. Mads Batchel, both online, and looking forward very much to hearing from you. We understand you have a presentation to share on your end, and we'll look forward to seeing that. You have 10 minutes to present to us, followed by time for questions. So thank you for being here virtually. And Mr. Mollard, I understand you're quite far away from us physically, so thank you for making the time and effort to be here, and we look forward to hearing from you when you're ready.
Aroa mai for not being there in person, just circumstances and life. First of all, tēnā koe, Mr. Chairperson, kia ora e te whānau to everyone on the council. I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you. The reason I'm here today is I represent the Manawatu Food Action Network, and part of my role with the Manawatu Food Action Network was to help write a CAI resilience strategy for the 4412 area of Palmerston North. And in the strategy that we wrote, it was contracted to us through Ora Connect, which is an amazing group of mainly Māori health providers, including the Haere Whānau Centre, the Papaioa Pacifica Community Trust, Te Tihi, Kāinga Ora, Te Wakahuia, and Best Care Whakapai Ora. And also with partnerships from the New Zealand Police, the Palmerston North City Council, Just Search, and Environment Network Manawatu. And within this work that we did, we presented a CAI resilience strategy to the people of Palmerston North, to Ora Connect, and it's going to be handed over to the people of Palmerston North in June. And one of the things we found is that in our city, there is, in the 4412 area of Palmerston North, there's up to 10,000 people that live with food insecurity on a regular basis. And what that means is that people have stress in their lives because they haven't got enough healthy, quality food to give to their whānaus. And through that work, we discovered through the dreams of the people we talked with to whānau in those situations that there's 6 different streams how we can help people to get more healthy, quality food into their lives, and that's education, working on giving people the best information possible for how to eat healthily and eat cheaply, and also to educate different health providers and food providers on how to support whānau. Then there's the food economy, and that's supporting our economy locally to be able to provide the best quality and cheapest food possible for our community. Another stream that's really important was the community stream, and that's ensuring that the community comes together to share food, to connect with each other, to swap recipes, to swap ideas, and to support each other. And then there's the food support hour, and that's the areas where people are in crisis and need support, and awesome mahi from people like the Methodist Social Services, Salvation Army, Just Search, St. Vinny's, Te Pātaka Kais, Te Whare Kohas, a whole bunch of different amazing groups of people doing really good mahi in our city. Next.
Kia ora, Dave. Just sorry to jump in there. Your screen isn't showing, so we're not seeing your presentation at all. We're just hearing you. Did you want to bring up the images?
Sure.
Cool. Sorry, everybody.
Apologies about that, whānau. And then there's social enterprise, and that's working with families and people to create their own micro businesses to support themselves, their whānaus and their communities, and on a more of a macro scale, support communities. And of course, marakai is really important in terms of people growing their own food, developing some getting the support they need to grow their own food. So that the other 6 streams that we found to be very important to supporting whānau to get from a place of food insecurity to food resilience. What is food resilience for our city? Well, really, it's physical and economic access by all Palmerston North residents at all times to enough food to maintain an active and healthy lifestyle. And we acknowledge that in everyone's lives we have crises, we have emergencies, but what we want is for our city to be a place where people don't need to go to Just Zilch or to the Methodist Social Services or to the Salvation Army or Te Takakai, except in times of crises, or if they want to support the kaupapa of that organisation, such as the environmental aspects of Just Zilch. Why does Palmerston North City need a food resilience policy? Because people are living in insecurity at the moment, and our food system is unsustainable. And this is research done by some amazing researchers at Massey University in 2019, before before the COVID hit, and has created a whole bunch of new stresses for our community. And why does Palmerston North City Council need to lead a food resilience policy? Well, you guys are the kaitiaki of our city. It's important, and you have an obligation to for the social well-being, the economic well-being, and of course the environmental well-being of our city. And a food resilience policy is just another piece in the puzzle to help support those goals. So the food resilience policy that we're asking you guys to start working on is a foundation document to create the framework for a collaborative community effort to achieve food resilience. What we want you to do is identify and make available suitable council resources that can help with food production, community gardens and other related activities, and to support the frameworks that enable communities to use the spaces in our community. What would a food resilience policy do? Well, Palmerston North already is a food hub. Around our district, we're surrounded by enough food to feed millions of people. We've got the amazing dairy farms up in Taranaki, the incredible fruit and wine and grape vineyards over in Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, and to our south we've got the breadbasket of New Zealand and Otaki and Kapiti, where they're growing amazing amounts of root vegetables. We want to make Palmerston North, and of course Palmerston North, a distribution hub for food for the Lower North Island. We really want to connect the food industry that is in our community with the people in our community. We want to create more pride in our neighbourhood, and we want to look at a new way of looking at community challenges from a collective, holistic view. And of course, a food resilience policy will create social cohesion through everyone working together. The social well-being of our people is really important. We need to make food available and also help people make good food decisions. We know that food breaks down cultural barriers. You've all been to the community day in the square, and my personal work at Awapuni Community Gardens. I've seen the way refugee communities have connected to different communities and different cultures in our community through the act of growing food. And of course, a healthy community is a positive community. The economic well-being of our city is really important, and a community that is well fed is more productive. We make better decisions when we're well fed. The New Zealand Police are doing some groundbreaking work in Palmerston North, looking at new ways to reduce crime. And one of the things they've found is that supporting community gardens is one way of creating activity with an empty space. Localization of our food system will create economic boost for our region. If we're buying more food that's grown within our city region, it's not only going to be good for our economy, but it's going to be good for our environment as well. And speaking of the environment, the localization of our food system by having locally grown food, and when I say locally, I mean within meters of your home, and sometimes it gives us a lot more food resilience. Also reduces the food miles that food is having to transport through. And of course, a community that is well fed can focus on longer term thinking. through the research I've done, and I've met with lots of people who are struggling with food issues at the moment, I found that food is not the biggest issue in people's lives. Food is a symptom of the bigger issues in people's lives. So where food resilience policy for the city is not going to solve everyone's problems, but what it is going to do is provide the framework for people to have a little bit more time and space to deal with the real issues in their life. Who else is doing this at the moment? Already Auckland has a food resilience strategy. Wellington's working on a really good one. Christchurch has had one for a really long time. And those organisations have seen the value in making sure that the kaitiaki of their city take responsibility to ensure that people in our city have the best possible access to healthy food. And I guess the real question is, if we don't do this now, when? You all know that our food system is stretched to almost breaking point. The distribution chains have broken down through the last couple of years, and we've relied on a system that long-term isn't sustainable. So what we need to do is fix it, and creating a food resilience strategy for our city is the first step for us to help support our whānau to be able to grow their own food, to support themselves and make decisions for themselves. So yeah, that's looking forward to some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Muller. Just check with Ms. Battichell. Is there anything you wanted to add before we move to questions?
Yeah, kia ora, thanks for that, Brent, and thanks for that, Dave. That was a really great presentation. Well done. I just wanted to add, we're really excited about the launch of the strategy, the work that Dave has done on behalf of Ora Connect for the last 12 months. We have launched kind of the strategy for 4412, and we're working towards how we might implement a lot of the actions that will come from that strategy in terms of building the community food resilience in that part of town. And one of the streams of work around that is kind of looking at advocating to council to go, hey, this is actually a really important thing for the city as a whole, that food resilience has come to the fore as part of, as a result, one of the results of this awful pandemic that we've just all been living in. We've really seen that in a tangible way where we haven't in the past, where food resilience, access to food distribution, has become issues that everybody is starting to understand as being real. And there's a real need right now, not only with the pandemic, but the ensuing cost of living crises and all of these other things, that this hasn't been, this when the council kind of put the long-term plan together, this wasn't front of mind. But we're saying now it is really front of mind, and it is time to do something about it as soon as possible. And so one of the streams of work is to kind of advocate for council to take some responsibility and go, well, what is our policy around food, and how can we ensure that food is available and resilient in our city for our people? So,
great.
Any questions?
Thank you both for introducing the 4412 initiative and the clear call around the food resilience policy. It complements really well what we heard from Mr. Morimeyer in the recent annual budget hearings. And your shared enthusiasm for this is very, very clear in what you brought to us this morning. We do have several questions, firstly from the Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Dave. Good to see you again, and hope you're well. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks, Mads, for chiming in as well. Look, I have no doubt what you've put in front of us is really topical at the moment, but I didn't hear a lot about education as a key pillar. The lost art of growing a veggie garden. I mean, it happens at all levels. But is there any work going on in that space?
Thanks, Grant. Yes, yeah, you are right. It's only 2 generations ago that almost all New Zealanders had to grow their own food to survive. We are blessed in our community that we do have lots of cultures that are still have the wisdom to grow their own food, and it's about supporting those people to share their wisdom with others. But yeah, the Kai Resilience Strategy for 4412 has identified several key educational element projects to work on to support people. One of them being Let's Grow Tamariki, a working in partnership with Plant to Plate and the Ministry of Education to ensure that every kura in the 4412 has a well-managed community garden, has a garden club, and has the connections with kids, so that tamariki through every stage of their schooling are able to grow food at school and hopefully take it home and learn to grow food at home as well, and inspire their whānau to grow food at home. We also have, we're working on developing a online video series about how to cook in-season food in a topical and funny way, including food that's provided by Just Silch, so that people can learn to recipes using the bizarre ingredients that sometimes land in their bags if they do go to Just Silch. So that's another education program. And of course, we want to support the work done by Super Grands and Haere Whānau Centre, who are delivering incredibly cool workshops around preserving, about cooking in season, and also bread making. So yeah, there's quite a few more educational initiatives in there that I could share with you later on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. And just one final question, Mr. Chair. Community gardens obviously provide a real sense of place for those communities, but also a real valuable source of food. They're quite a big pillar for this program.
Yeah, we really want the community garden space to grow. My experience of being the kaimahi of Awapuni Community Gardens for the last 4 years has really opened my eyes to the value of them, particularly with different minority cultures that may be struggling to connect with the wider community, and also for people who are just passing by and actually get inspired to grow food. So working hand in hand with the amazing people at the Community Development Group and Division at Palmerston City Council, who have already done a really good job of creating a community garden startup guide. We would definitely love to see more community gardens in the Palmerston North area, with particular focus in the 4412 strategy on a couple of parks in Highbury and also in West End.
Great, thank you.
We'll move online to a question from Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, David and Mads. I just wanted to inquire around the community pantry type of initiative that different groups and individuals have put out on the street front around the city, and actually different communities around the country. What sort of thoughts have you got around that type of initiative where the canned foods and the fresh produce can be placed there and people can just come with no cost to access?
Yeah, thank you, Vaughan, for that question. There's been some really successful te pātaka kais around the city and some not so successful. I can think of Tuturo's, who has one in Romberg Street, who supports the community every second day. He jumps on his mobility scooter and heads into Just Silch to get a whole pile of food to support the whānau that are living on his street. And he also is involved with growing gardens and communities. So he grows a lot of his own fresh vegetables and puts them out on the street. And that's been a real successful model, but it has also come with some challenges. Obviously, leaving food out on the street, first of all, can attract vandalism, and also can have food safety issues. So definitely we want to encourage the food sharing economy, but there has to be an education process around making sure that people don't vandalize it, and also that the food that's in there is safe to eat and continues to be safe to eat.
Just in follow-up to that, would you, with the observations, say that there's more pluses than the negatives to kind of live with in that kind of initiative? Because I guess any initiative is going to have its risks and its downside.
Yeah, I totally support more te pātaka kais around the city and in people's properties where people can keep an eye on it. It creates a sense of social cohesion. It creates pride in the neighbourhood. And just makes you feel good when you drive past and you see Te Pātaka Kai stocked up with food. It makes you feel good about the city. So there are a whole bunch of positive social aspects to that I definitely support.
Pātaka Kai can also sit really nicely in collaboration with a community garden, especially if you have a garden on say a roadside. So Tauranga has a really lovely garden up there run by one of the community groups. It's beside a church. It's a busy road, but they the volunteers turn up once or twice a week. They do the gardening, and they're stocking those shelves with fresh vegetables, and it creates some really great community cohesion and also localization. It's fantastic.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Dave and Mads. That's a really helpful presentation. I'm just really interested in the scope of the proposed food resilience policy, and just wonder if I could get some comment just around sort of wider community development needs in terms of probably intergenerational deprivation and building social capital, and how we actually sort of connect that to a wider response.
Thanks for that really deep question, Councillor Hancock. Put me on the spot. Sharing food is an important step to breaking down social barriers between neighbours, and one of the real focuses we want to that an amazing group called Growing Gardens and Communities is doing is encouraging people to grow more food than they need to share with their neighbours. So from a micro level, sharing food with each other is one of the first steps to creating a really cohesive, positive vibe in a neighbourhood. I'm not sure if I've answered your question fully. Maybe Mads probably can provide some more depth to that.
Thanks, Dave. I also found the question quite deep and not quite sure where I needed to go with the answer. Did you want to clarify a little bit more about what you're asking?
Yeah, I suppose just in the presentation, you talked about sort of, I guess, the police doing some things in there in terms of their contribution to the program. Obviously, Ora Connect is much broader than just food resilience. And I just really want to get some thinking around, if we are just talking about a food resilience policy, how do we guarantee that we actually make sure that we connect that to other parts of our response to the experienced intergenerational deprivation and building social capital? Like, I'm really interested, I guess, in making sure that if we respond to this, we do so in a more cohesive way than perhaps we would otherwise.
Thank you. That clarifies that, and great point. Yeah, the food resilience policy that we've done on behalf of Ora Connect is just one part. So we're working directly with the Kai Security Squad of the Ora Connect for this piece of work, and this piece of work does sit within a wider scope of deprivation across that part of town. I see your point, and I think that it does need to connect, and maybe that is the only point that needs to be made at this stage. But that we see food resilience policy as being a really important thing for the council to invest in, and what we see it will do is that it will create priorities for things like community gardens to be enabled more. So we haven't been able to enable community gardens very easily in the past in the city. There's been a lot of red tape barriers and all sorts of things. But if the city as a whole sees that or food resilience as a really important thing and has a policy around it, then I can see some positive flow-on effects for the easy enabling of community initiatives to be, better resourced, I think.
Thank you, Mads,
Yeah,
and Dave. I apologise for the otherworldly question which I've asked. Thank you.
Moving back online to Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have had a look at the Christchurch food resilience policy, and a lot of the priorities in that, I guess, encompass activities that are already happening here in Palmerston North, but we don't, I guess we have no policy that kind of connects them all. So are you thinking that by developing such a policy, we would be able to just provide more direction to things that are already happening, or are there new initiatives that you want to see come out of a food resilience policy developed by Council?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Yes to both. The Christchurch model is something that we look really closely at, and I think it is a really good model to follow. And you are right, Palmerston North City Council is doing a great job already of connecting things. The community development division is working really hard, and you mentioned earlier about fruit trees and parks, and Councillor Bowen also mentioned about communicating that sort of stuff. And the council is working, your staff are working really hard on creating a fruit tree map of the city that will be both interactive for seasonal needs. And so that's a really exciting thing that is happening. And there are a lot of, within the 4412 Kai Resilience Strategy, we've identified over 100 different projects that are either happening, that need more support, that are in the planning stage, or are the dreams of whānau. And a lot of those things that are mentioned both in the Christchurch City Council food resilience strategy, we're already doing here in Palmerston North, or we have plans to do.
Yeah,
sorry, it's about having a policy that is the framework. It gives us the tūranga waiwai to stand on to push these things forward within council, particularly with council staff.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for clarifying that, because I know that there's always some nervousness amongst elected members about what the potential financial consequences of enacting such a policy might be. So I thought it was good to give you the opportunity to talk about things that are already happening, and that this would in a way be able to bring them together in a coordinated way, as opposed to it's not necessarily about setting up a whole new work stream of programs to be done by council.
That's
yeah,
correct.
a lot of the work streams are done by individual community groups, but what I see a policy like this as enabling is kind of giving those council offices that already exist more of a standing ground to be supporting those even more, and potentially additional resourcing in the longer term. But it's not all about money. It's about kind of coming from a point of acknowledgement that this is something really needed in the city, and that this is something that the council is working towards, a little bit like the overall eco-city strategy, or that it sits within that. It sits within the sustainability review. Like it would all feed into that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
Back into the room, Councillor Dingwall.
Thanks, Dave and Mads, for coming and talking to us today about this. I guess my focus is my questions are really on the community garden side of things, because I hear that there are heaps of challenges involved in trying to set up community gardens. And when we're looking at a policy like this, are you thinking that I guess having more access to community gardens is something that we're trying to do, or do you think the community gardens that we already have are sufficient to meet the demands that we already have? Or how are you envisioning things, this policy impacting on community gardens as an example?
Thank you, Renee. Yeah, you are right. There are a number of challenges with starting a community garden, and probably the biggest challenge is keeping people motivated. It is for the long haul. It is a massive commitment from volunteers, and so the the work that the community development group has done, creating the community garden guide, I think is outstanding. There are a few challenges and barriers to people starting community gardens, but that's not a bad thing, because we love people to be passionate, but we also want people to commit, and we want to make sure that any community garden that starts up is successful. So there is quite a robust policy procedure to starting community gardens. But what my experience of starting a community garden is that all you need is to connect people within a community who already have groups who are willing to take ownership to become the kaitiaki of that community garden. Then walk along, and Manawatu Food Action Networks, one of their roles is to walk alongside those people to start their community gardens, along with partnership with Palmerston City Council. So the challenges are there, but there's also a load of people that are really interested in starting community gardens in our city. So I'm really excited about the next couple of years.
Cool.
I think, and can I add to that? I think that a policy will strengthen that. That a food policy will definitely strengthen the kind of support that council could give to emerging and existing community gardens, and that there may be, one of the things that we've identified in our sort of strategy is that that community gardens often have they always have a driver or somebody who's holding it together in some way, shape or form, but often those drivers do feel isolated because they're leading a garden all on their own, and a lot of people, and there's all these different factors that have to be taken into consideration, and having sort of a group of community garden leaders or being able to support those leaders will ensure longevity and also the sort of sustainability of those gardens in a longer term.
Wonderful. So that actually leads into my second question. With the education side of things, are you envisioning education more for sort of the leaders of these kind of initiatives like community gardens, or are you wanting more one-on-one? And I guess the reason why I ask that is often people say, well, I've heard people say, you just need to educate people on how to have a veggie garden and how to cook veggies. But often for a lot of people in poverty, they don't have access to any space that they could create a garden in, and they are transient, and they have a whole bunch of other issues. They may not even have a working oven. So is the education more for the bigger initiatives that support these people who are or are they still one-on-one?
The education, you go, Dave.
No, education is both macro and micro level. From a Manawatu Food Action point of view, we want to train the trainers, teach the teachers, and so that's the way we're supporting people. But we really encourage different initiatives like the Palmy Crop Swap, where you can go along and learn about growing food, or the Let's Grow Hybrid Day lunch meeting, where you go and learn from people who have a lot of wisdom about growing food. So we want to support that on a micro level and also on a macro level, supporting community gardens on the governance and the logistical side of things.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Finally, a further question from Mr. Peter Tarangi.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Dave and Mads. Thank you for your presentation. I support all the initiatives that you've support and that you have spoken to in terms of encouraging a citywide food security policy. For me, the big issue is about preparedness. If I think about what we went through during lockdown and how supermarket shelves emptied of basic food items like flour and water and cooking oils and the likes, it was quite frightening to me. So to me, the issue is an education issue, and one to do with preparedness, we don't know what's ahead of us. We don't know whether we're going to face more lockdowns with climate change and all sorts of other things happening in diverse places. To me, preparedness is a key issue for us as a city. If we are the kaitiaki of our citizens. And I think with basic food items like grain and water are paramount in that arena. I was just thinking recently of, we've been through three to 4 weeks of no rain, and we're almost at a stage where we had to consider having restrictions on water use. We're very vulnerable. And as a community, I think that's where our focus should be, is on preparedness. Also, and on education. I sometimes more walk now than jog, sometimes ride my bike along the Mangoni stream banks, and I can look into people's backyards, and I'm lucky if I can see 1 or 2 gardens in people's backyards. So there needs to be an educational thrust in that area, I think, in terms of, you can just plant silver beet, that's a good start, and you just stick it in the ground, it takes care of itself in this environment. And so for me, as a citizen, I think that's where we need to be looking at, is preparedness. It's almost a civil defence issue, really. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Can I just clarify as well, Mr. Titterang, if there was a response or a question that you were seeking a response to from...
It's more of a comment, I guess.
That's all right.
Mr.
Just
Chair.
wanted to clarify.
And for me, I endorse the idea of having a citywide food security policy with that particular emphasis on preparedness.
That is clear. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, can I just check if you've got a further question or if it's moving to comment?
I just wanted to indicate that I've sent through a recommendation to the administrator, and just to check that that's been received on email.
I can confirm that it has. That does appear then to have cleared the questions. So firstly, thank you, Mr. Muller, and thank you, Ms. Batichel, for your presentation. Again, very enthusiastic, very well thought out, and has certainly given us some matters to consider. We know that food resilience, food security is absolutely at the heart of our social well-being and our environmental well-being, and appreciate you bringing this to us. So look now to the recommendations, if we can get both of those to the screen. I'll just read those out, and then I'm happy to indicate that I'll second those. So we have 2 recommendations. Firstly, that the committee resolves that the presentation be received for information, and secondly, that the Chief Executive provides a short report to the Environmental Sustainability Committee advising a suitable process and resourcing required to establish a food resilience policy for Council. Again, I'm happy to second that. Councillor Johnson, did you want to introduce those?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm very happy, obviously, to move that we receive the presentation for information, but I didn't want to let this opportunity go by without indicating our willingness, I think, as a council, and I hope I'm reading the room right, even though I'm not actually in it, to proceed with this type of policy. We had a kind of an introduction to this during submissions, and I did go away and have a look at the Christchurch policy. And actually, there's nothing scary in it at all. It's all the sorts of things that we have indicated are part of our strategic direction about developing community-led projects, about being an enabling council, about supporting projects that create social cohesion, that contribute to environmental sustainability. So it's a very, to me, I think it's it's not a difficult ask at all. But what it would do if we were to develop a policy like this is it would provide some leadership in the space. And I think, as has been indicated, it would provide a platform for initiatives to go forward, knowing that they were part of council's direction, as opposed to when a one-off project comes up, it's it's hard sometimes for council officers to decide whether that fits in or not to the direction that council has set. So I didn't want to just jump straight to say that we would develop a policy, because I do think in these times we need to know what would be involved and what the costs and resourcing implications would be, and whether or not any other work would have to go on hold in order to develop it. So that's why it's just a first step. But I think there's real value in work in this space, both from a community perspective and from an environmental perspective. And I think, it's good that this work has started on, I was about to say my side of the city, but, that started on 4412. But there are other areas of the city that are also in need of these types of initiatives, particularly I'm thinking Roslyn. But, the whole city really would benefit from some coordination and enabling policy on behalf of council. So I'm very grateful to the Food Action Network for bringing this forward and for the work that they've done already and have been doing for several years, actually. But I think now might be a good time for us to work on bringing lots of these great initiatives together and coordinating a policy that enables more of it to continue. So I do hope you'll support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, for speaking to your recommendation. I have a comment from the Chief Planning Officer regards the additional recommendation before we move to wider comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, the words were only flashed up on the screen briefly, and they may be suitably generic, but I guess the first key thing that needs to occur as part of any consideration of a policy is whether a policy is needed. So in terms of that initial report back, it would really be answering that question, what is the policy trying to achieve and is it required? So I'm just looking at the words now. It's probably sufficiently generic in terms of a process and resourcing. So the first step in a process for a policy consideration is really determining whether it's required and what problem it's looking to solve.
Yep, thank you for that advice, David. And if you're happy with that the recommendation provides you the scope to give us that advice, then that would be very helpful.
We've got a nodding head in the room.
Yes.
Moving to wider comment, the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And look, I just want to acknowledge Dave and Mads, and thank you for this CHI, or Food Resilience Strategy. I've got a copy of it here, courtesy of Todd, and it's great to see a past TUIA student that I mentored, Jasmine Pye, did some of the artwork. So really, really nice to see. And also the work that Aura Connect does. Look, I'm supportive of what Councillor Johnson's put up. It does seem that there does need to be some coordination. I think there's some really great work that has been going on, but sometimes the officers don't know whether this is council work or it's been acknowledged or a policy of council. So, and elected members want to see it happen or not. So I think this gives some direction, really, and I think we've got to pick the best of some other policies as well. And although it is food specific, I think it's got some other great consequences around creating some social cohesion and some economic benefits as well. It's building on that resilience or security, as Mr. Tarangi sort of spoke about. And I'll just read you a proverb, a famous Chinese proverb. Give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime. And I think this is the essence of what we're talking about. I too have been around the city and have been gobsmacked about the lack of understanding of growing vegetables now. It is a lost art, and yes, there has been some people just can't literally do it for whatever their circumstances are, but there's a lot of people that can do it but choose not to do it. So it's really around or don't know how to do it. So it's the education and teaching of that, and I think we've got to give that a major push. That's where I think we could, at a macro and a micro level, we could make some real differences to people's lives and stop the dependency as well. And well, what I mean by dependency is dependency even on Countdown and foodstuffs. So, I mean, it's really trying people to help themselves. There's some great existing networks. The community gardens, these are such a good thing. And you see them overseas, in Britain, in Europe, the Netherlands especially, and they're gathering places. People come together. So people get real benefits and gratitude about sharing food too. My own father-in-law could probably feed all of a country, and he has great delight in sharing his veggies right around the place. So I think we need to be doing a lot more of that and the strength of that. So I'm supportive of the policy, but I think it's more than just the southwest suburbs. I do think there's a lot of people doing stuff in other parts of the city that need to be connected. Ashurst is one I can think of that does a lot of good work in this space. Hokowhitu, I know there's some more private community gardens, and what I mean by there, a little group of road or houses that share some vegetables together in Summerhill. So I think we can do a lot for the whole city. So glean the best out of other examples, and so look forward to seeing what comes back from officers. So thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thanks Dave and Mads for the presentation. I think it's been really timely for this issue to be elevated, and particularly following Maury's presentation last week. I think it's really important. It's a really important issue for our community, and when I think of council's responsibilities to wellbeing, you know, in my mind, you know, we invest a lot and we put a lot of focus on housing and social housing, and that is absolutely important. But when I think of what people in our community, what the essential things are that they require the most, it's housing and it's food. Those are the top two things. So much of what we do in council is important and it's wonderful and it's appreciated. You know, events, arts, all sorts of things. But it doesn't come close to those two things, housing and food. If you don't have housing and food, what sort of well-being do you really have? Very limited. So I do think this is a good way forward, and I agree with comments from others that have already been made. I do think establishing a policy will put a good, an appropriate framework about what, around what we're doing and how we do it and I think that'll be helpful for the community groups who are also involved in this space to see what council's role is in guiding and enabling this.
Just before moving back to Councillor Johnson for right of reply, certainly endorse what I've heard from colleagues, and for me, a further dimension of this is we as a city, we as a region, take incredible pride in growing some of the best food in the world and then putting that on planes, trains, and trucks and sending it away. It is essential that we also have mechanisms in place that assure that this community and everyone in it is well fed. So I'm absolutely supportive of this direction. We will look forward to seeing what comes back by way of scope. It is important that we think about the environmental resilience side of what we do in terms of food production, and that relates right through from city design through to how we use space in our city for these sorts of solutions. So wholeheartedly be supporting this and pass back to you, Councillor Johnson, for right of reply.
I don't think I need to say anything extra. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
There being no further comment, we'll call for the recommendations to get back to the screen. and call for a vote. All those in favor? And we have a unanimous decision in favor. Thank you all. That moves us to item 8, which is the confirmation of minutes. And we have the recommendation that the committee resolves that the minutes of the Environmental Sustainability Committee meeting of 30 March 2022, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record, which I'm happy to move, seconded by Councillor Butt. Are there any items to correct or clarify in there? Councillor Dingwall.
I guess it's kind of a question, and I'm not quite sure how to fix this, but on page 79, when we look at the recommendation that the CE report back on implications relating to the Green Building Council recommendations to councils, there's a narrative bit that happens before that, but there's no kind of mention of what those changes actually are. And because it was a presentation, it's how is that, if anybody was able to look at these minutes, how will they know actually what that refers to?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. Advice that I've received is that the presentation is available online, and of course there's also the recording of the meeting on the YouTube channel, which could be, that item could be rewatched to clarify that matter if any further clarification was needed beyond what's in the minutes.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Any other questions? There being none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And we're unanimous. Moving on to item 9, which is the investigation of options for eco-burial, and invite Kathy Deaver-Todd, Manager, Parks and Logistics, to come and present that report to us.
Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to present this extremely interesting report. Well, we found it extremely interesting to put together. I take it that you have read the report, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have on it.
Thank you, Kathy. We have a question from the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kathy. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm wondering what you know to date around MDC's exploration of eco-burial and incorporating that into their cemetery plan. And the question is coming from the perspective that when this came to council, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, part of the rationale for why we couldn't incorporate this into James Line was because a traditional cemetery environment wasn't appropriate for an eco-burial environment. Those two things didn't really mesh together. And so I'm wondering how that would work in another region.
Certainly. So there's two parts. There's a Burial and Cremation Act, which requires the council to provide cemetery and register burials within that cemetery. And then there is any district plan provisions for the individual territorial authorities in terms of where cemeteries can be. So from both aspects, the natural burial needs to occur in an area that has been designated and set aside by the council for burial. If you look at Makara Cemetery, the natural burial cemetery is within the cemetery, but it's a separated area. So the intention would be that in undeveloped parts of of either of the two options that Manawatu District is considering, a more park-like environment. So you would, in the same way when you come into the Kelvin Grove Cemetery at the moment, you're directed towards the Ashes lawn down to the children's cemeteries. This would be another part and developed in a more park-like way. So that is what happens in all the other natural burial cemeteries in New Zealand. They are part of a wider designated cemetery that has been set aside by the council, and how that cemetery is managed. In other cases, it can be a partnership model, or it may be run directly by the council.
Okay. And then just to follow on, is if we were to explore a partnership of some form with MDC around the eco-burial aspect, what would that look like in practice? Would that be hearing the views of what our council is wishing for an eco-burial site? Would that be having a say in signing off on planning? What would that actually look like in practice?
We haven't probably got to that level of understanding yet. As you'd be aware, within the Manawatu and Whanganui area, there's a lot of shared service arrangements between councils. So it could be as detailed as a shared service arrangement in the development and management, or it could be as simple as making sure that the way in which the cemetery is run caters to the wider wishes of the wider region, and that people may or may not have to pay an out-of-district fee if they are not a Manawatu District Council citizen. So it's really the whole range in between, and we haven't got that far along the track yet. And certainly that would be something that would be coming back to Council for consideration, both councils, in terms of how they may wish to proceed together.
Okay. And then just my final question is, when were MDC expecting to have their plans for their cemetery finalised or drafted? So
the investigations into the biodegradation are underway at the moment. The funding for the investigations is within the 22-23 Manawatu District Council annual plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kathy, for this report. I'm not sure if I'm the most appropriate person to ask this question, but have we spoken to, I guess, mana whenua at all on their views of how we use this kind of land and what's important for them in terms of this?
Yes, so in terms of through the work that Office has been doing together and in discussions with Rangatane about cemeteries and the provision of cemeteries, they nominated Danielle Harris to have discussions with me about certainly cemeteries and provisions of cemeteries going forward, and we've had a number of discussions, including the role of a council under the Burial and Cremations Act and the role of Rangatane and provisions with Urupa, and how that's a moving, changing field. And so there have been the conversations in between. Certainly the strongest view put forward from Rangatane at the moment is consideration of how they may have an area that has been set aside for Māori, but they are still having internal discussions on what that might look like. Certainly from a health perspective, Rangatane are aware of the submission that has been made, and they're also aware of the cultural needs of many groups across Palmerston or City, and it's really about how those things all work together.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I suppose really I just want a little bit of clarification just about the paper itself, is that the title is Investigation into Options for Eco-Burial, and then recommendation 1 talks about natural burial, recommendation 2 then talks about eco-burial, and then recommendation 3 talks about natural burial. So in Palmerston North, we actually cater for eco-burials, but the question is around natural burials. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, so you'll notice in the report that we've got a definition section, and the reason being is that the recommendation from Council was to investigate eco-burial, but as officers we put it in that definition section and said actually the submission and what you're really talking about here are two things, eco and natural burial, which is why we expanded from the resolution of Council to cover both things. You are quite right, the investigation has identified that Council supports eco-burial through its current provisions at the Kelvin Grove Cemetery, Perhaps the larger barrier to eco-burial is the provision of the supporting funeral services that are dealt with by the funeral industry to that. But certainly if those services are available, then we support eco-burial within the Kelvin Grove Cemetery, Ashew Cemetery and Bunnythorpe Cemetery at present.
Okay, so just for consistency, should we actually just perhaps amend recommendation 2 to actually refer to natural burial rather than eco-burial?
The amendment of a recommendation is at the will of the committee, so we need to take advice from the chair on that.
Yeah, I suppose I just want a view in terms of what is the best fit in terms of what we actually want to achieve out of this item.
Certainly, from an officer point of view, if that was to be extended to say that the recommendation has investigated both eco-burial and natural burial, that wouldn't be a problem from an officer's point of view.
Yeah, sorry, Kathy, I don't think we're making any progress here. The reality is, in Palmerston North, we actually already cater for eco-burial. The issue that we've got, and the matter which we probably need to explore with Manawatu District Council further, is options for people who want to have a natural burial as opposed to an eco-burial or a traditional burial.
Not hearing a question mark at the end of that, that sounded more like a comment. By way of reply, I can indicate that if there is a mood to amend recommendation 2, it would be better to amend it with an and rather than a replacement, given the direction that was given to council was also specific to eco-burial.
Thank you for your guidance there, Mr. Chair. I'm actually happy to move that amendment. If place and.
Yeah, can you just ensure that wording is available to administrators?
Thank you.
Further questions? I've got a couple. We'll see what else may come through. Thank you, Kathy, for the report. Is Horowhenua District doing anything around identifying needs or responding to them in this space?
Not that we're aware of, and that is most likely because there is a provision down in the Kapiti District.
Thank you. And further, just around clarifying the status quo, part of the report in 6.2 indicates, to my reading of 6.2, that the best we can do is an eco-casket and eco-embalming type approach, but I noted above in section 5.4.3 seems to indicate that caskets are in fact already optional. Can you just clarify the status quo?
Yes, certainly our Muslim burials at the moment are in shrouds, they're not in caskets.
So the statement in 6.2 referring to kind of eco-caskets being as far as we can go, it doesn't reflect that?
No, I think the intention of the sentence was that people could use eco-caskets. It's not indicating that it is a requirement to use an eco-casket.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Kathy. So on natural burials, what are the numbers that we're talking about? Are we talking hundreds or low numbers, or, you know?
I would refer you to the case study at the back of the report with the experience of Whanganui, where certainly they expected a much larger proportion, 10 to 15% of people indicating that they intended to use natural burial, and on average 489 deaths occurring in the Whanganui district, but in the last decade only 14 burials have occurred in their natural burial cemetery. And the reason for that is there are a number of barriers that families find difficult to overcome with a natural burial in terms of the memorialisation And so it's not just a cost factor, but it's also a family decision. So people may indicate that they want natural burial, but certainly the experience from those 2 case studies is the level of people taking that up is much lower. So we would expect quite a low number here in Palmerston North, so probably about twice the death rate of Whanganui. Less than 200 people in Palmerston North get buried in our cemeteries every year. If we were to bring that down to 10 to 5% of that.
You're talking really low numbers.
Yeah, we are talking quite low numbers.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to get context of the scale of what we're talking about, because there's, I'll leave it to comments. Thanks.
Great. There's no further questions in the queue. Thank you, Kathy, for your time and presenting the report and the work that went into preparing it. So we have a series of recommendations in front of us, which I will read through, but will first indicate to Councillor Hancock that given that we don't have a seconder yet, I've just brought that into the mix as the substantive. So the first recommendation is that Council resolves to adopt option 2, continue to work with Manawatu District Council and the opportunity to establish a natural burial cemetery in the Manawatu, and directs the Chief Executive to provide a progress report to Council in 2023. Secondly, to note the findings of the investigations and options for eco-burial and natural burial in Palmerston North. And thirdly, to note that Manawatu District Council are currently investigating the establishment of a natural burial cemetery. I'll look for a seconder on that. Councillor Hancock. And we'll call for comments. I'll go ahead and open up. Look, I think this is a pragmatic way forward, and did want to firstly acknowledge and thank the officers for the work that's gone into looking at collaborative solutions to what has been a long-standing challenge in this community. And while we do note that this is quite a small scale in terms of the actual numbers of people and families that may choose to access this service, that it is a service that's widely established in New Zealand, and one that as a community it would be wonderful to be in a position to offer as soon as possible. So I'm certainly very supportive of the general direction here, and also very supportive of identifying collaborative approaches, providing they provide some solutions that are authentic in the natural burial space, and that move us to a something with greater proximity than what we currently have in terms of Otaki and Whanganui. So would urge you to support these recommendations on that basis, and ask if there's any further comments. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I think I'll start my machine again. It doesn't seem to be working properly. Look, I'm supportive of the natural burial recommendations there. This is sort of goes away to, and that's why I teased out the scale and the numbers. You know, we're talking very low numbers, and I note the submitter, the Women's Health Collective, have submitted on this almost the entire time that I've been on council. So it is coming from a small community in our wider city, but it is still important. And with the future of local government, they're looking to councils to do some shared services. So we know we're challenged to probably provide this at the cemetery, but why don't we look to some of our partners around us and look at possible collaborative approach where we could do something with another council. I think that would be the best outcome for ratepayers, but also the community that is seeking this sort of opportunity. And it has been on the books for quite a while. So it would be good to, for the officers to perhaps get some sort of parity with their colleagues and other councils, and really try and push this forward. Thank you.
Don't appear to be any further comments, so we will move to the vote. All those in favour? and we are unanimous. This moves us to item 10 on our agenda, which is the citywide emissions inventory for 2021. And I'll ask Adam Jarvis, our senior climate change advisor, to come to the table, introduce his colleagues, and present the report. Over to you, gentlemen, when you're ready.
Good morning again, councillors, Mr Chair, members of the committee. Pleasure to be presenting this in person after a number of online presentations, and I'd like to take another opportunity again, this time in person, to introduce David Watson, our new climate change analyst, dressed today in an exceedingly English jacket, if I may say, and I'm told a lovely vintage tie from Shetland, of all places. Yeah. So, you can all enjoy that. We've just got a short presentation, a few slides, just quickly running you through the report, just the key data. Just while we're waiting for that, I can give you some brief comments. Encouragingly, this is our first inventory since the initial 16-17 baseline that shows a reduction in emissions, albeit only a very marginal one. However, when you consider that on a per capita basis, we're looking at about a 6.5% reduction in emissions per person. So, encouraging to have both since 2020, which, as you'll recall, was a very unusual year for us all, of course, but also for emissions in the city, encouraging to have peaked those emissions and to begin to see the hopeful start of a declining trend.
Maybe we just pause, Adam, until the PowerPoint's.
Well, alternatively, I can just refer you to the charts in the report, because that's all I've really got on the slides. So if you'd care to turn to page 103, there's a table there which we could, I'd like to talk to briefly. Essentially just the key sectors there. There are quite significant changes that have occurred. We've seen a modest but significant reduction in stationary energy. Coal continues to decline throughout the city. As more, there's no new coal boilers and things being developed, so that's declining. And a reduction generally in all but the electricity emissions, I believe, as we've seen a transition, continuing to transition towards electrical. Oh, here we go. Right, I think I've covered that already. So this is the report I'm just referring to. So stationary energy just declined somewhat. Transport, 5.6% reduction. Thinking we're beginning to see a trend there of the light vehicle fleet in particular towards electric, which is having some impact. But we think the broader impact here is likely the transition towards working from home and less overall trips. Waste has increased significantly, and we've sort of covered the broad reasons for that already today, in terms of less diversion from landfill due to the decisions, particularly made in China, regarding accepting our recycling. IPPU, so that's industrial emissions particularly, it has just increased nationally, and we don't break, that's the one sector we don't break down locally into, we don't have local data for that, so that's increased nationally, and that's sort of all we can really say there. Those include a lot of, those emissions include a lot of refrigerants and concrete production, chemical processing, and like I say, I don't have local data for that there, unfortunately. Agricultural emissions have increased. We have seen stocking rates within the city increase somewhat. Just more dairy cattle in particular, and a reduction in the less emissions intensive sheep and beef. So that's how it's broken down from a sector point of view. Proportions remaining relatively the same as they have, or as they were in 2016-17. Obviously, with waste having increased reasonably significantly, but still a very small proportion of our overall emissions. Last slide here. We expect to deliver this current calendar year's inventory to you in a year's time. And due to the additional resource that we have now, we're also expecting to deliver the 2018 and 2019 inventories at that time as well, so you can have a bit more of a time series of understanding how emissions are developing over time. Whereas, this is only our third inventory that we've published, 16, 17, 20, and now 2021. So you'll be able to see how that's developed, and you might be picking out outliers or trends. We're in the process of automating a lot of this a little bit more, simplifying the work that we have to do. So we're hoping to be able to deliver those to you. So just two last notes then. The dashboards that are available on the website, and this is alongside all of our other key data that Council collects and publishes in the Invisio platform. We've been updating that every time we publish one of these, and we expect to update that dashboard again after this meeting, now that this is published. However, it has been noted that the website, there's a couple of pages on the website that haven't been updated since the initial 16-17 report was first published. So what we're proposing here is that we just update that as a single sort of source for all of the emissions reports, both the citywide ones, such as this, and the internal organisational emissions as well. So any member of the public that wants to find a citywide or a council inventory can just go to that website and find it. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome again, David. And yes, in 3 dimensions in person. Must check with you at some point about the provenance of that Shetland tie. That sounds quite interesting. Open for questions, and we do have a number. Firstly, the Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, David. Nice tie as well. That's good. Look, a couple of questions, and thanks. It's really good to see this work. Could I just ask, are your colleagues in the region doing this? I mean, other councils, and are you all communicating?
So there's a couple of answers there. Firstly, in the regional council, Horizons Regional Council, has published a regional level inventory recently. There was some data that was broken out by TA, but that wasn't, as we've more recently understood, done from the ground up. That was just prorated based on population and land area, rather than as we've developed.
So it wasn't a true data set.
Sure. At the same time, we've also, as officers, been assisting other TAs in the region to conduct their first inventories. We have some significant experience now in delivering these, and so I've delivered a series of workshops and have made myself available to help people through that, both in terms of citywide emissions and their organisational ones. We understand that we're sort of somewhat of a privileged position here in terms of the resource that we have. A lot of TAs are sort of managing with 0.3 of an FTE,
yeah, sure,
on this sort of thing. So so we've been helping them, and I would be expecting, I can't speak for them, but I would say it's likely that you'll see other TAs publish inventories over the coming months, and say 12 months. Yeah,
good. Just a couple more. Just in that table around industry, and there's quite a lot there, and I suppose that's coming with growth. Would that be right?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like I said, it's a national level data set, that one. So it's difficult to say exactly. A lot of that is down to concrete use. So it could be that in 2021, following a lot of delays of work in 2020 due to COVID, that nationally the construction industry saw a big uptick, or stocks that had been drawn down in 2020 were being replenished. Yeah, so sure. That's one area that it's sort of there for your information, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that change again next year.
Right. So it could be a slight out, because it is quite a big jump, and just could be a slight outlier. With that stationary energy, you spoke about coal, and we're talking boilers there, are we really? Or heating?
Yeah, heating.
Yeah. And where are they? What are we talking about? Schools, universities, hospitals, those sorts of things, are we? Factories?
So that's a figure that's come down. I mean, as you see there, it's only really a 1% of even the stationary energies, total stationary energies use now. So I understand, and you'll forgive me, I don't know the exact details, but I believe that the hospital was recently retired their coal boiler, or is in the process of planning to. This is a citywide figure, so there's still people that have old coal ranges, sure, that use them.
Yep.
But I think when you compare that figure, when you consider how polluting coal is in terms of carbon compared to electricity, but then note the fact that coal emissions are only a very, very tiny fraction of electricity, that give you a sense of the scale of the coal that's remaining in the city. It's a very, very small amount of coal. Okay. A lot of switching to electric heat pumps and so forth over the last few years or decade.
And with transportation, are we seeing? I notice hydrogen's not on there yet. Is that because it's just emerging?
So I would not expect to see hydrogen necessarily pulled out as its own. So hydrogen is not in and of itself an emission source. When it burns, it generates water. It's whatever creates the hydrogen. Sure. The process that creates the hydrogen.
Right. Whether it's green hydrogen or whether it's dirty hydrogen.
Sure. I mean, even if it was generated using electricity, we would expect to see that show up, if we became a significant producer of hydrogen, for that to show up in the stationary energy electricity consumption at first. It's something that if it became a really major source of emissions going forward and we had a lot of hydrogen use in the city, that I would probably look to break out for you as a transport specific line. But there'd be a fair amount of work to sort of estimate that.
No, you've explained that well. Just my final question's around waste, and the you made the comment, and the numbers have increased there. Is that city and commercial waste inventory? You sort of talked about the recycling decisions made have contributed to that, but is it construction waste? Is it all waste?
It's all waste going to landfill in the city.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Move online now to a question from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Adam and David. And I'm regretting that I'm not actually able to see the tie from my position here, so I'll just have to take your word for it. In terms of questions on the report, I've got two areas really. One is around how we as a city might be different to other cities. Are there any specific sort of Palmerston North effects that we need to be aware of compared to, say, another city in New Zealand? Or are we pretty much on a par with every other city at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor. When we published our initial baseline inventory 2016-17, there was a comparison made with other TAs at that time. It's because there's no, we're still sort of moving towards a nationwide system of reporting and consistent timelines and so forth. It's difficult to make a comparison. You know, we've only just published this, and this is about as early as you could possibly publish this, given the lag in reporting from central government data sets for 2021. So, you know, there's information in here that only became available in April. So as a consequence, we're not able to see what this looks like in comparison to other cities in 2021. What I can tell you is, going back to 16-17 at least, is that we're roughly comparable with other cities of our general size and shape. So if you think about places like, there's two elements here, rather, I should mention. So first is transport. So that can vary quite significantly depending on, you know, a place like Auckland has or can have, in Wellington, you know, significantly longer travel distances and transport-related emissions. And the second is in agriculture. So Dunedin, you know, is roughly on par with us in many respects, but has, as a result of where its boundary is drawn, a far more greater proportion of agricultural emissions than we do. It's about all I could probably say at the moment, but I would say we're there or thereabouts with other comparable cities.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is around, really, how we use this information in this report to feedback information to our residents to inform their choices. So one of the bits of feedback that we got as a climate change portfolio group from a piece of public engagement was that people were looking to council for advice on how to reduce their emissions, both in the workplace and also at home. So are there any plans to communicate some of this report with specific advice or specific, picking off the areas in which we could encourage people to make some change to help reduce the citywide emissions? Because, I mean, I can see that the report is very helpful in itself, but if it just stays as a report without the information in it being communicated to the public, I'm not sure how we can hope to get more, more reduction as the years go by. So is there any plan to kind of have a comms plan around communicating this information and also applying it so that people can make informed choices?
Sure. So,
Just to note, you've got some officer support there, Adam, if you'd like to avail yourself.
did you want to take the question regarding
The comms?
communicating this particular report? Because there's some broader work.
Okay, you start and I'll finish if
Sure.
Adam's got any.
All right. Thank you, Liv. So, I mean, I'll defer to Liv in a moment regarding the communications regarding of these figures. With respect to providing information for members of the public, I'd note there are quite a number of tools out there that enable people to calculate their own personal emission footprints and can provide advice regarding what choices they could make that to change. So my initial sort of thinking would be that there's not necessarily a huge utility in us providing yet another one to the public, particularly in light of the fact that released on Monday was the National Emissions Reduction Plan and by central government, and so there's clearly a big push from central government to reduce emissions, and as I've talked about previously, their resources in terms of reach, reaching people on YouTube and so forth, is orders of magnitude greater than ours. With that said, as I indicated to you in the March Environmental Sustainability Committee, we are expecting to come back to you in the both in September and then in the lead up to the next LTP with a series of recommendations about how it is that we, as council, can best support the community to reduce its emissions. So the first step for us is to understand and really unpack the 350 pages of action planning from central government. What is it that they're going to be focusing on? Where is it that we are going to be able to have the greatest impact in terms of focusing our own resources on where, perhaps there are, local issues or, where we have significant legislative or other powers, such as in the transportation space, to affect change. So there's just to summarise, a huge piece of work that we're just starting now. We're expecting to come back to elected members with options for taking this forward and achieving your long-term citywide targets. So anything you...
Great. That's very helpful in itself, Adam, actually, because that's what I was looking for, is how we move from information presented to council into action for community. And so what you're saying is, there'll be a report coming back in September to detail that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a start of a conversation that's ultimately going to lead towards the next LTP, I think, would be perhaps I would characterise it. Yeah.
All right, I won't build up too much, but yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Might just pass over to Liv briefly to discuss the comms regarding sharing this.
Yep.
I think sustainability is an area that, as a comms team, we are looking far more closely at how we continue to support that. And our community is particularly passionate in key areas like waste, and every week I probably get about 100 messages on Facebook asking when we're going to have green waste or food waste collections and things like that. So I think this kind of data is really interesting and will be widely consumed by our community, and we're looking at how we, get that information out wider and how we can get them to respond. Obviously, of course, then the feedback we get is, how are we also supporting that? So I guess it at times can be a double-edged sword, but I think the other thing I was going to say is that generally comms and sustainability is becoming a really big area, and we're seeing that some councils are actually employing comms advisors just for the sustainability space. So I think it's an area that we're jumping on pretty quickly, but it's going to only get bigger and more demanding, I guess is a word, over the next couple of years.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thanks. A final question from Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Adam, for this report. I have two quick questions. I'll ask one by one. I'm still wondering where this coal emissions are coming, who is actually the user of this coal, and also you say that the coal usage has been decreased by 37% since the last inventory. Was it a result of a voluntary shift in technology, or we have played a part in convincing those people to not to use coal?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just note, I think the question about sources of coal emissions has been answered in response to the Mayor's question, but the second question around the role that Council's played would be useful to hear a response to.
I agree with you, Mr. Chair, but the answer to the Mayor's question was that it's from the boiler, so I couldn't understand where those boilers are. Is it with the hospital or a small units?
Thank you for clarifying. Over to you, Adam.
Excuse me. So, yes, I would say, again, this is really, we're looking now at a very vestigial component of our total emissions, that the days of every industrial plant and large commercial site having its own coal boiler are long behind us, and for a variety of reasons. In terms of the role council's played, I think it's be fair to say that a lot of them have just simply been economic in drivers. Comparing from a household point of view, for example, the cost of running an electric heat pump versus all the costs involved of not only purchasing coal but keeping your coal range cleaned and clearing soot and all of that. By the time you place some sort of value on your own time, it becomes very attractive to go out and purchase a heat pump instead, although admittedly they're not necessarily fully comparable. But also, and I don't have the details to hand, I understand that there was quite significant subsidies provided by central government some years ago in terms of making those switches. And again, we're still working through the 350 odd pages of the National Emissions Reduction Plan, but understand that there are, I believe something in the order of 25 million allocated there to assist with the remaining transitions away from coal. So more than that, I'd have to probably get back to you on.
Thank you. Can I ask a quick question? One more quick question.
Yep.
This AV gas or aviation gas, are we considering only messy aviation, or Air New Zealand is also, data is also involved in it?
So, well, you see there's aviation gas and jet kerosene, both reported there as different emission sources, and those are due to the type of plane being flown, but all of the emissions associated with aviation in the city, assuming if they're, I think the way we operate it is that if you're filling up in Palmerston North, that's counted as ours. So, and then, if they're filling up in Auckland and flying down here, that's accounted for at Auckland, which is appropriate because you'd only want half of the emissions of a flight associated. So that, just to reiterate,
Yeah, I got my answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Those pilots.
Thank you. There don't appear to be any further questions, so I'll say thank you, Adam, and thank you, David, for your contribution through this report. Noting that we're already 5 minutes past 12, we do have a committee meeting starting at 1 p.m., and we clearly will not be able to complete all business of this committee before quite a bit of time would pass. I'm going to adjourn at this stage, and we will recommence environmental sustainability at the conclusion of the infrastructure committee meeting this afternoon. Thank you all.